Maria Santos walked into First National Bank asking for a $500 business loan to save her struggling catering company. But when the bank manager denied her application, it wasn't because of her credit score or business plan. It was because of something that would trigger a federal investigation, cost the bank millions in fines, and reveal a discrimination scheme that had been destroying minority-owned businesses for over a decade. What happened in that 15-minute meeting would expose systematic lending discrimination across 3 states, lead to the largest fair lending settlement in the region's history, and transform Maria from a desperate small business owner into the catalyst for banking reform that would help thousands of other entrepreneurs. But to understand how a single mother asking for $500 brought down an entire discriminatory lending system, we need to start with why Maria needed that loan in the first place. Maria Santos had been running Abuela's Kitchen for 3 years from her small apartment in East Dallas, building a reputation one family celebration at a time. Word of mouth had grown her catering business from weekend quinceañeras to corporate lunch contracts worth thousands of dollars monthly. But success in the food business requires equipment, and equipment requires capital Maria didn't have. The commercial-grade refrigerator she'd been renting had finally died, taking with it $200 worth of food for a wedding reception scheduled for that weekend. Her savings account, carefully built up over months of 14-hour days, held exactly $307. Not enough to replace the refrigerator, not enough to fulfill her existing contracts, not enough to prevent her business from collapsing just as it was beginning to thrive. Maria had excellent credit. She'd never missed a payment on anything in her life. Her business had consistent revenue and growing demand. She kept meticulous financial records that showed steady profitability. On paper, she was exactly the kind of customer banks claimed they wanted to serve. Her first stop was Community Trust, the small local bank where she'd maintained personal accounts for 8 years. They knew her business, and had approved a small business credit card for her the previous year. "I'm sorry, Maria," loan officer Janet Mitchell said, reviewing her application. "For equipment financing at this level, you'd need to go through one of the larger banks. Our business lending program caps out at smaller amounts." Janet leaned forward confidentially. "Between you and me, try First National. They've been aggressively courting small business customers in this area, marketing themselves as community-focused, eager to help local entrepreneurs." That afternoon, Maria walked the 6 blocks from Community Trust to the gleaming glass building that housed First National's newest branch. The location had opened just 18 months earlier, right in the heart of the historically Latino neighborhood where Maria lived and worked. The lobby was impressive: marble floors, modern furniture, and prominent displays advertising small business loans with phrases like "Your dreams, our support," and "Building community through partnership." Maria approached the information desk, where a young receptionist with a bright smile greeted her warmly. "I'd like to apply for a small business loan," Maria explained. "Absolutely. Let me get you set up with our business banking manager, Mr. Davidson. He handles all our commercial lending." Richard Davidson emerged from a corner office wearing an expensive suit and a smile that seemed practiced rather than genuine. He was perhaps 50 years old, with graying hair and the kind of confidence that comes from never having to question whether you belong in a room. "Mrs. Santos, welcome to First National. I understand you're interested in business financing." Maria followed him into his office, noting the diplomas from prestigious universities and photographs of Davidson with various community leaders. She felt a brief moment of optimism. This was exactly the kind of professional relationship she needed to grow her business. "I run a catering company," Maria began, settling into the chair across from Davidson's desk. "I need to replace some equipment to fulfill existing contracts and continue growing." Davidson opened a loan application packet, his movements efficient and businesslike. "What amount are we discussing?" $500. "I know it's not a large amount, but I have strong cash flow and excellent credit. I can provide 3 years of financial records and letters from satisfied customers." Davidson's pen stopped moving. He looked up at Maria with an expression she couldn't quite read. $500 for equipment replacement? Yes, I've found a good used commercial refrigerator that will meet my needs. The loan would be short-term. I could pay it back within 6 months based on my current contract revenue. Davidson set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. What happened next would change the trajectory of both their lives, though neither of them knew it yet. "Ms. Santos," Davidson said, his tone shifting from professional courtesy to something colder. "I think there might be some confusion about the type of customers First National serves." "What do you mean?" Maria asked, though something in Davidson's tone made her stomach tighten with apprehension. Davidson opened her credit report on his computer screen, scanning information that clearly showed excellent payment history and responsible debt management. "Well, your credit is adequate," he said, emphasizing the word in a way that made it sound like an insult. "But First National has very strict lending standards. We can't just approve loans for any small kitchen operation that walks in here." "Kitchen operation?" Maria kept her voice level, but she felt heat rising in her cheeks. "Sir, I run a licensed catering business with consistent revenue and growth. I have 3 years of tax returns and business records." "Ms. Santos, I'm sure you understand that certain types of businesses are inherently risky. Food service, especially in this demographic area, has very high failure rates. Our investors expect us to make sound financial decisions." The words hit Maria like physical blows. She'd encountered subtle discrimination before. The way some potential clients' enthusiasm cooled when they met her in person. The assumptions people made about her education and professionalism. But this was different. This was blatant. "Are you saying you won't consider my application because of my ethnicity or the neighborhood I serve?" Davidson's expression hardened. "I'm saying that First National makes lending decisions based on objective financial criteria, and your business doesn't meet our standards for commercial lending." "What specific criteria am I failing to meet?" "Our minimum business loan amount is $5,000. Below that, we consider the administrative costs prohibitive." Maria had researched First National's lending products extensively before coming in. "Your website advertises small business loans starting at $1,000. That's for established businesses with substantial assets and multi-year operating history in stable markets. I have 3 years of operating history, and my financial records show consistent profitability." Davidson closed her credit report with unnecessary force. "Ms. Santos, I think you might be more comfortable with one of the community development financial institutions that specialize in your type of situation. There are organizations specifically designed to help minority business owners who can't qualify for traditional banking services." The patronizing tone was unmistakable now. Davidson wasn't just denying her loan. He was telling her she didn't belong in his bank. Maria gathered her documents slowly, her hands trembling with anger rather than nervousness. "Mr. Davidson, I'd like a written explanation of why my application is being denied, including the specific financial criteria I'm failing to meet. That's not necessary for informal consultations." "This wasn't informal. I filled out an application and provided financial documentation. Federal law requires written explanation for loan denials." Davidson's confidence wavered slightly. "Ms. Santos, I'm trying to save you time and disappointment. Your business model isn't suitable for our lending portfolio. Put that in writing. I don't think that's..." "Federal fair lending laws require written disclosure of denial reasons. I'm formally requesting that documentation." Maria had spent enough time researching small business loans to know her rights. Davidson's reluctance to provide written explanation was telling her everything she needed to know. "Fine," Davidson snapped, pulling out a standard denial form. He checked several boxes rapidly and scribbled his signature. "Here's your denial notice." Maria read the form carefully. The reasons cited were vague. Insufficient business assets, inadequate collateral, unstable market conditions. None of them corresponded to the specific criticisms Davidson had voiced during their conversation. "This doesn't match what you told me in person. The form covers our standard criteria. You mentioned my ethnicity, my neighborhood, and certain types of businesses. None of that appears here." Davidson stood up abruptly. "Ms. Santos, this meeting is over. I suggest you explore other financing options more appropriate to your situation." As Maria walked out of First National, the denial form clutched in her hand. She felt something beyond disappointment or anger. She felt the familiar weight of being judged by her surname, her accent, her zip code, rather than her qualifications. But unlike previous encounters with discrimination, this time Maria had documentation. Davidson's verbal comments, combined with the disconnect between his stated reasons and the written denial form, suggested something more systematic than individual bias. That evening, Maria called her cousin Elena, who had been trying to expand her house cleaning business into commercial contracts. "I went to First National for a small business loan today," Maria said. "Elena, I think we need to talk about your experience with banks." Eleanor's sigh told Maria everything she needed to know. "Which one turned you down?" "First National. The manager made it pretty clear it was about who I am, not my qualifications." "Maria, I applied there 6 months ago for equipment financing. Same story. They practically told me to try the check cashing places instead." "What did you do?" "Nothing. What could I do? It's not like they said anything I could prove." But Maria had proof. She had Davidson's recorded comments about certain types of businesses and demographic areas. She had a denial form that didn't match the verbal reasons given, and now she was learning she wasn't alone. "Eleanor, how many other business owners do we know who've had problems with First National?" "You really want to know? Because once you start asking that question, you're going to get angry at the answers." Maria was already angry, but anger without action was just frustration. What she needed was strategy. Maria spent the next week reaching out to every small business owner she knew in East Dallas. What she discovered was far worse than individual discrimination. It was systematic exclusion operating with corporate precision. Carmen Rodriguez, who ran a successful auto repair shop, had been denied financing for diagnostic equipment despite 15 years of perfect credit history. "They told me my business was in a declining area and automotive repair was oversaturated," Carmen explained. But 3 months later, they approved a loan for Murphy's Auto, 6 blocks away in the white part of town. David Morales, whose family restaurant had been a neighborhood institution for a decade, had been rejected for expansion financing. Managers said Mexican restaurants were high-risk ventures, with cultural barriers to mainstream success. Meanwhile, the new fusion place in Deep Ellum got approved for twice the amount I requested. The pattern was unmistakable. Latino business owners with strong financials were being systematically denied, while comparable white-owned businesses in nearby areas received approval. The denial reasons were carefully coded, avoiding explicitly racial language while clearly communicating discriminatory intent. But knowing discrimination existed and proving it legally were different challenges. Maria needed expert help. Attorney Sarah Chen specialized in civil rights and fair lending cases. Her downtown office was modest but professional, and her reputation for taking on institutional discrimination was formidable. "Ms. Santos," Chen said, reviewing the documentation Maria had gathered, "what you are describing sounds like classic redlining, the practice of systematically denying financial services to residents of certain areas based on racial or ethnic composition." "I thought redlining was illegal." "It is. Has been since the Fair Housing Act of 1968 and the Community Reinvestment Act of 1977. But illegal does not mean extinct. It just means discriminators have become more sophisticated about hiding their practices." Chen spread Maria's documents across her conference table. The denial form, notes from her conversation with Davidson, contact information for other rejected applicants. The key to proving systematic discrimination is demonstrating pattern and practice. Individual cases can be dismissed as subjective business decisions, but when you show consistent patterns of rejection for minority applicants with comparable or superior qualifications to approved white applicants, that becomes legally actionable. How do we prove that pattern? We need to examine First National's lending data across demographic lines. Banks are required to report their lending statistics under the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act and Community Reinvestment Act. That data can reveal disparities that individual victims never see. Chen pulled up a laptop and began accessing federal banking databases. Let's start with First National's CRA performance examination. This shows their lending patterns by geographic area and borrower demographics. What the data revealed was staggering. First National's small business lending in predominantly Latino areas was less than half the rate of their lending in comparable white areas. The average loan amount to minority businesses was significantly smaller, and the denial rate was nearly 3 times higher. This is a smoking gun, Chen said. These disparities are far beyond what could be explained by legitimate business factors. What do we do with this information? We file a complaint with the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. That's the federal agency that regulates First National. We also file a federal lawsuit under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act and the Civil Rights Act. Maria felt a mixture of excitement and terror. What does that mean for me personally? It means you're going to become a public figure in a federal civil rights case. It means First National will fight back with every resource they have. And it means that if we win, you'll help change the system for thousands of other business owners. Chen leaned forward, her expression serious. Maria, I need you to understand what you're committing to. This isn't just about your $500 loan anymore. You'd be challenging an entire system of institutional discrimination. That takes courage most people don't have. Maria thought about her daughter, Sophia, who at 8 years old already talked about running her own business someday. She thought about Elena, Carmen, David, and all the other entrepreneurs whose dreams had been systematically crushed by coded racism disguised as business policy. What's the first step? Chen smiled. The first step is gathering more evidence, and for that, we're going to need some help from an unexpected source. The unexpected source turned out to be Marcus Williams, a former First National loan officer who had quit 6 months earlier after repeatedly clashing with management over lending practices. I couldn't stay complicit, Marcus explained during a meeting at Chen's office. Davidson and his team were operating under clear directives to minimize lending in certain neighborhoods. They called it risk management, but everyone knew what it really meant. Marcus had documentation, internal emails discussing demographic risk factors, training materials that taught loan officers to use coded language when rejecting minority applicants, and performance metrics that rewarded employees for maintaining low lending rates in Latino and Black neighborhoods. The most damning evidence, Marcus continued, is the 2-track system they used for evaluating applications. White applicants got the benefit of doubt. Loan officers were encouraged to find ways to approve borderline cases. Minority applicants faced heightened scrutiny and additional requirements that weren't applied consistently. Chen reviewed Marcus's evidence with growing excitement. This is exactly what we need to prove intentional discrimination rather than just disparate impact. But building a federal case required more than documentation. It required additional witnesses, and that meant convincing other discriminated business owners to join the lawsuit despite the personal and financial risks involved. Maria organized a community meeting at the parish hall of St. Augustine Catholic Church. 23 business owners attended, representing everything from auto repair shops to beauty salons to consulting services. I know asking you to join this lawsuit is asking a lot, Maria addressed the group, but they're counting on us being too scared or too isolated to fight back. Every time one of us accepts discrimination in silence, it makes it easier for them to discriminate against the next person. Carmen Rodriguez spoke up from the back of the room. What if they retaliate? What if other banks blacklist us for making trouble? Chen answered from her position near the front. Federal law prohibits retaliation against plaintiffs in discrimination cases. And frankly, if banks are already systematically denying you services, you don't have much more to lose. One by one, business owners began sharing their stories. The details varied, but the pattern was consistent. Professional, credit-worthy Latino business owners being rejected for loans that would have been routinely approved for white applicants with similar or weaker qualifications. By the end of the evening, 17 business owners had agreed to join the federal lawsuit against First National. But Maria's decision to go public with discrimination allegations had consequences she hadn't anticipated. The next morning, Maria received a call from her largest corporate client. a law firm that contracted her for weekly lunch meetings and special events. "Ms. Santos," the office manager's voice was apologetic but firm, "we've decided to make changes to our catering arrangements. We'll be handling food service internally from now on." Maria's contract with the law firm represented nearly 40% of her monthly revenue. Losing it would devastate her business, just as she was fighting for the right to grow it. 2 days later, another major client cancelled their standing order, then a third. Word was spreading through the business community that Maria Santos was trouble. A business owner willing to sue banks and make discrimination allegations. "They're trying to destroy your business to force you to drop the lawsuit," Chen explained. "It's classic retaliation, and it's highly illegal." "Illegal doesn't pay my rent," Maria replied, reviewing her rapidly deteriorating financial situation. "If I lose much more business, I won't be able to maintain the lawsuit anyway." But help came from an unexpected source. The discrimination case had attracted media attention, and coverage of Maria's story resonated with communities throughout Dallas. New clients began calling. Families planning weddings and quinceañeras specifically requested Abuela's Kitchen because they wanted to support a business owner fighting for justice. Corporate clients concerned about their own diversity and inclusion commitments reached out to replace the contracts Maria had lost. Within a month, her business was stronger than ever. But more importantly, the community support demonstrated that Maria's fight represented something larger than individual grievance. It represented a demand for economic justice that couldn't be silenced through retaliation. The federal investigation was moving forward with remarkable speed. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency had launched a formal examination of First National's lending practices, and preliminary findings supported the discrimination allegations. Internal bank documents subpoenaed during the investigation revealed the true scope of the systematic exclusion. First National had deliberately avoided marketing in Latino neighborhoods, had set different qualification standards for minority applicants, and had actively discouraged loan officers from approving applications from high-risk demographic areas. Most damaging of all was an email chain between Davidson and regional management, discussing strategies for managing the minority lending ratio to maintain CRA compliance while protecting profitability. The bank's defense began to crumble as evidence mounted. What had started as Maria's individual complaint about a $500 loan denial had exposed a systematic scheme affecting thousands of potential borrowers across multiple states. 6 months after Maria's initial loan application, she found herself sitting in a federal courthouse, listening to First National's attorneys argue that their lending practices reflected sound business judgment rather than discrimination. The evidence against the bank was overwhelming. Federal regulators had documented systematic disparities in lending rates, loan amounts, and approval criteria. Internal documents showed deliberate strategies to limit minority lending. Expert witnesses demonstrated that the disparities couldn't be explained by legitimate business factors. But perhaps most powerful was the testimony of the business owners themselves. Carmen Rodriguez described how First National's rejection had forced her to use predatory lending services that charged 25% interest for equipment financing. "I could have grown my business and hired more employees," she testified. "Instead, I spent 2 years paying off high-interest debt that a traditional bank loan would have made unnecessary." David Morales explained how discrimination had forced him to abandon expansion plans that would have created 15 new jobs in East Dallas. "My family's restaurant serves the community, employs local people, and contributes to the neighborhood economy," he said. But First National treated us like we were asking for charity instead of offering a sound business investment. When Maria took the stand, she spoke directly to the bank's defense that her loan denial reflected standard business practices. "Mr. Davidson didn't deny my application because of my credit score or my business plan," she testified. "He denied it because of his assumptions about who deserves access to capital and who doesn't. He told me to seek services more appropriate to my situation. And the only thing that made my situation different from any other small business owner was my name and my neighborhood." First National's defense crumbled under cross-examination. Davidson himself, forced to testify under oath, could not explain why his verbal comments to Maria differed from the written denial reasons, or why similar white-owned businesses had been approved for comparable loans. Regional management was forced to admit that internal communications referenced demographic risk factors that had no basis in legitimate lending criteria. The federal judge's ruling was unequivocal. First National had violated federal fair lending laws through systematic discrimination against Latino business owners. The bank was ordered to pay $17 million in compensatory and punitive damages to affected business owners and to implement comprehensive reforms to their lending practices. But the victory extended far beyond financial compensation. Federal regulators used the First National case as a template for examining other banks' lending practices throughout the region. The investigation revealed discrimination patterns at multiple institutions, leading to a comprehensive overhaul of business lending oversight. New federal guidelines required banks to demonstrate active outreach to minority business communities, to justify any demographic disparities in lending rates, and to provide detailed explanations for all loan denials. Most importantly, the Community Reinvestment Act was strengthened to include specific requirements for small business lending in underserved areas. Banks could no longer meet CRA obligations through token investments, while systematically excluding minority entrepreneurs from access to capital. 2 years after walking into First National asking for a $500 loan, Maria Santos stood before a Senate Banking Committee hearing room in Washington, D.C., testifying about the need for stronger fair lending enforcement. Abuela's Kitchen had grown into a catering company with 12 employees and a commercial kitchen facility in the heart of East Dallas. The settlement money from the discrimination lawsuit had provided the capital Maria needed to expand. But more importantly, the case had opened doors that systematic discrimination had previously kept closed. Senator Williams, Maria addressed the committee chair. What happened to me wasn't unique. It was part of a deliberate system designed to exclude Latino and Black entrepreneurs from the capital markets that fuel business growth. The only thing that made my case different was that I had the resources and support to fight back. The hearing room was packed with small business owners, civil rights advocates, and banking industry representatives. Maria's testimony was part of a broader congressional examination of discriminatory lending practices that had been inspired by her case. The changes we've seen since the First National settlement demonstrate that discrimination isn't inevitable, Maria continued. When banks are required to serve all communities fairly, when oversight agencies take discrimination seriously, and when business owners have the tools to fight back, the entire system becomes more just and more productive. The statistics supported Maria's testimony. In the 2 years since the settlement, small business lending to minority entrepreneurs in the Dallas area had increased by nearly 200%. New businesses were opening, existing businesses were expanding, and the economic development that comes with fair access to capital was transforming communities throughout the region. After the hearing, Maria was approached by Elena Vasquez, a small business development specialist with the Small Business Administration. Ms. Santos, Elena said, "We'd like to offer you a position as a regional advisor for minority business development. Your experience and advocacy could help other entrepreneurs navigate the challenges you've overcome." Maria smiled, thinking about the journey from that humiliating meeting with Davidson to this moment of recognition and opportunity. "I'm honored by the offer," she replied, "but I think I can do more good as an independent voice. There are still too many businesses like mine that need advocates who understand what they're facing." Maria had started the Maria Santos Foundation, which provided legal support and advocacy for minority business owners facing discrimination. The foundation's work had already helped dozens of entrepreneurs secure fair lending and overcome systematic barriers to business growth. That evening, Maria returned to Dallas and to the commercial kitchen where her journey had begun. Sophia, now 10 years old, was helping package desserts for the next day's catering orders. "Mummy," Sophia said, "Mrs. Chen says you're famous now because you fought the bank and won." Maria laughed, remembering when Sarah Chen had seemed like an intimidating legal expert, and Maria had felt like a desperate small business owner with nowhere to turn. "I'm not famous, Mija. I just learned that sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, even when it's scary." Will you teach me how to do that? Maria looked around the kitchen that had started as a dream and become a reality through determination, community support, and the courage to demand justice. I think you're already learning, she said. Every time you see something unfair and decide not to accept it, every time you believe that you deserve the same opportunities as anyone else, you're learning to stand up for what's right. Through the kitchen window, Maria could see the First National branch where her ordeal had begun. The building looked the same, but everything inside had changed. New management, new policies, new commitment to fair lending that had been mandated by federal oversight. More importantly, the community around it had changed. Small businesses were thriving with access to fair financing. Entrepreneurs who had been systematically excluded were now building the economic foundation for a more prosperous neighborhood. Maria's $500 loan application had been denied, but her fight for justice had created opportunities worth millions of dollars for business owners throughout the region. The little girl who had grown up believing that hard work and determination were enough to succeed in America had learned that sometimes you also need the courage to fight systems designed to keep you from succeeding. But she had also learned that when you do fight, when you refuse to accept discrimination as inevitable, you can change those systems for everyone who comes after you. The next morning brought new challenges: a catering contract for a corporate merger celebration, a foundation case involving a discriminated veteran business owner, and Sophia's school science fair where Maria would serve as a judge. But as Maria prepared for another busy day, she reflected on how different her life had become since that humiliating meeting with Davidson. She was no longer a woman asking for permission to succeed. She was a woman who had earned her place at every table and was working to ensure others could do the same. The transformation wasn't just personal, it was systematic. And that, Maria knew, was the real victory. If you enjoyed this powerful story of one woman's fight against discrimination and her victory for justice, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you do not miss our next incredible business story. You can watch it right here on your screen now.